Well, first I want to thank Jerusalem Church and the Georgia Salzburger Society for inviting me to be here. It is such an honor first to stand in the very spot that noted theologians have stood in centuries past. It is a thrill and an honor and humbling to speak to this group. And when I heard Robert talk about Ebenezer being the stone of help, and I think about that has been my experience as long as I have known about Ebenezer, which has not been as long as it should have, with the help of Erica Bragg and Patsy Ziegler and Robert Peavy. I mean, all this that I'm going to present today could not have been possible without their assistance. So I'm just so appreciative. I'm also very appreciative that they will accept, I think as an affiliate membership, this Scottish Presbyterian from a state away. So it's not necessary to actually be a Salzburger descendant. You can be a big fan. So, pardon me? That's right, that's right. So see Deborah. My first introduction to the Chalice was thanks to Mark Zuckerberg, actually, on Facebook. And as a museum group came through, they posted the picture of the Salzburger Chalice on their page. And I happened to follow them, and I immediately started asking questions, and I was directed to Miss Patsy. And my husband and I came down, and thanks to the very generous docents, they allowed us to examine it. And ever since then, frankly, I have been obsessed with its story. And as it continues to unfold, I am more and more fascinated. So today is my view as kind of an outsider interpreting the material culture of this chalice, because that's what I do as a historian. So while you all have educated me in the heritage of the Salzburgers, I have married that with my interpretation as a piece of material culture and great significance. So the inscribed chalice stands poised to recount the Salzburger exodus and arrival to the Georgia colony in 1734. Of course, it was given by a young man, George Matthias Kinderlin, of Norlingen, Germany, who died young and bequeathed it. It arrived to Ebenezer in 1742. This multifaceted symbol of sacrifice not only chronicles its journey through its physical features and period accounts, but it also embodies and unifies a committed, benevolent, faithful, resilient people across continents and centuries. Now, just if you'll bear with me, just a little bit of the background, because it does play into kind of charting the path of the chalice. But the chalice's conception began in Norlingen, Germany, with a young man. Now, Norlingen was introduced to the Salzburgers as waves made their way through the city. The chalice is inscribed in German, and I'm going to draw on Robert Peavy's his translation, which is, "Whoever brings himself to the Lord's table with repentance and belief through the blood of the Lamb will be revived with consolation and healing." And that's around the bowl. Around the base is inscribed with the translation, "Such was the wish for the dear Salzburgers in Ebenezer. With each repeated enjoyment of the Holy Supper, George Matthias Kinderlin, 20 years old young man in Norlingen, who thought of you in love shortly before his end, November 1741. Now, Norlingen, as I mentioned, was actually at a crossroads of two vital trade routes, Frankfurt to Augsburg and Nuremberg to Ulm. Norlingen also hosted a very important trade fair, which served as the center for grain, livestock, furs, and metals. Nearly 331 Salzburgers descended on the city in the first few days of February 1732. Two clergy, a schoolmaster, and a scholar greeted them as the city bells rang. This must have made quite a sight, an impression on George Matthias Kinderlin, who was 9 years old at the time. He was born in Norlingen on August 15, 1722, and he was the second son of Johannes Kinderlin and his wife Anna Margaretha Kaufmann. Now, Johannes was originally from Ulm and served as a bourgeois lieutenant. He made his living in the lucrative textile trade as a fine art and wode dyer. How many of you know what wode is? Just a raise of hands. Excellent. I had no idea what that was. I found out it is a flowering plant that produces blue dye from fermenting the leaves and serves as the primary source for that color of blue before the introduction of indigo in the 16th century. In 1584, 1 acre of woad generated more income than 6 acres of grain. Johannes' skill and status differed from a normal dyer because he was able to create beautiful and multiple colors other than just black. He learned the trade from his father, Matthias, who likely learned it from his father. Now, George Matthias was on his path to continue his family legacy when he became ill, and the young man died on November 30th, 1741, at the age of 19 and a quarter years. And his formal will remains elusive. Now, Robert Peavy discovered the young man's intentions on his, and you can look at this on Ebenezer's website. It read in part, a young man of good family, 20 years old, a son of the well-known Mr. N., was reading the very edifying news from the East and West Indies, and in his illness, from which he died in Christ not quite 8 days, he was asked by his father how at his farewell he wanted his economized money and silver to be disposed of, whereupon, without engaging his father to it, he answered, 50 florins in cash to Transkobor, his silver, however, to be bequeathed to Ebenezer, and from the latter there should be made in Augsburg a cup for the church they are going to build in said Ebenezer, and then forwarded there. Soon after his death, the double bequest was handed to me to send to the proper places. So, a letter to a Dr. Franken was sent, 50 florins, and the silver, and specifically noted 2 ducats. How do you pronounce that? Ducats? Tomato. And the gilding, for the gilding of the cup is to be made. It also specified the inscription that is to appear around, that does appear around the top of the bowl and the base. Now, the mention of the 8 days has perplexed me, because according to documentation, the documentation records his death in October, but if he died on November 30th, and 8 days from that would have been November 22nd, I'm not sure where that discrepancy occurred. Perhaps it's the distance in translation. I'm not really sure. Maybe he revived and had a moment of energy. But regardless, 10 months after George Matthias died, his father also died, but not before fulfilling, thank you, it's okay. not before fulfilling his son's last wish. Thank you. Now, the chalice has 2 marks, and one of those marks divulge that the family turned to the Metropolitan Center for precious metal work, and that is Augsburg. It reigned as the unchallenged capital of the world for precious metal work in the 16th through the 18th century, and of course served as a natural choice to source Kinderlin's very important bequest. Religious freedom for Catholics and Protestants meant that gold and silversmiths of both confessions freely pursued the craft. And if you compare that to what the Salzburgers left, that lack of religious freedom, I find that very compelling. This attracted artisans of all skill levels throughout Europe to Augsburg, bringing with them technological advances and stylistic influences. This elevated the demand for Augsburg silver. Native-born Jacob Fugger, who is considered today as being one of the wealthiest men that ever lived, specialized in silver and copper mining and ensured a ready and abundant supply of the raw material. Some of the items that came from Augsburg is, and I do have pictures that I'll share after the presentation, but Queen Christina commissioned a silver throne for her coronation in 1648, and there's a whole suite of furniture. I'm talking chairs, mirrors, a dresser, all made out of silver and originating in Augsburg. The Goldsmiths Chapel in St. Anna's Church, and you might remember that St. Anna's Church is the home church for the Salzburgers, served as a tangible statement to the guild's power and influence. This association of craftsmen protected Protestant and silversmiths alike by appointing assayers or testers of both faiths to ensure impartiality. It also governed the standard, the workers, the types of tools, in order to avoid any one family gaining dominance or excessive power. And silver merchants distributed components of very large orders, like dresser sets and dinner services, among several workshops for expedience. And of course, this fostered a collaboration between all of the trades. Now, one mark on the base is what's known as the pyre or town mark, and it looks like a little pine cone. It happens to be Augsburg's seal and coat of arms, and it denotes that the assayer certified the article is made of 812 parts pure silver with 188 parts of other metals, chiefly copper. If we compare this to the English sterling standard of 925 parts pure silver mixed with 75 parts of other metals, chiefly copper, we'll find that Augsburg silver with that higher copper content is going to be more durable, which definitely worked in this favor. The other mark is IM, is the master's mark, and it belongs to Johann Mitnock III, a member of a preeminent silversmithing dynasty. Born in 1706, he was the son of Johann Mitnock II and Anna Regina Schlau. Johann III was at least a 6th-generation silversmith, and Anna was a member of at least a 5th generation of silversmithing families. He became a master in 1735, and his wife, Anna Regina's great-grandfather, crafted a platter that was presented to a Russian czar, which will give you a perspective of how well thought of their talents and expertise. Frankly, I stopped counting at 23 direct family members that were silversmiths and goldsmiths. Judging by Mitnock's extant pieces in museums like the Bavarian National Museum and the Met in New York, he was quite an accomplished artisan. In 1744, he crafted a partially gilt silver beaker for an imperial abbot that was engraved with the abbot's coat of arms. Now, Johann and his brother, who also practiced, established a niche market in ecclesiastical wares. And a year prior to the chalice's creation, Johann made a silver gilt Kiddush cup and Passover goblets, and another half dozen articles by his brother are known to exist. Now, we talk of gilding, or that gold wash that you see on pieces, and it came at a very high price. The process, known as fire gilding, involved evaporating mercury in a gold amalgam. The craftsmen breathed these lethal fumes during the heating process, and the gold remained on the surface. A documented silver beaker made by Mittnock provides a tantalizing association between Kinderlin, Mittnock, and the Georgia Salzburgers. It is inscribed 1748 and engraved with the image of the Salzburgers' home church, St. Anna's Church, with their Reverend Father Samuel Erzberger as its senior pastor. Now, Erzberger mentioned the chalice in his detailed reports to the trustees. George Matthias Kinderlin in Norlingen donated a silver communion chalice to the Salzburger immigrants in Ebenezer shortly before his demise in the month of October 1741 at the age of 20 to remember him each time they receive Holy Communion. And again, we hear this reference of October being the month of his death. Now, this is actually far more detailed account than Bolsius's account, where he receives the chalice from Muhlenberg. Most likely, Erzberger selected Mittnock from a pool of silversmiths that were attending worship in the Goldsmiths Chapel in St. Anna's, transferred the chalice to Court Chaplain Ziegenhagen upon its completion. When Henry Muhlenberg accepted the call to lead 3 congregations in Pennsylvania, he stayed with the court chaplain. The October 4th, 1742 journal entry read, "On Saturday, Pastor Muhlenberg arrived in Savannah and he rested on Sunday. He has accepted the call to the office of minister in Pennsylvania, and today he came by water via Abercorn. He brought along letters from the most praiseworthy society and from Court Chaplain Ziegenhagen, the reports from Prussia, and the massive silver and heavily gilded communion chalice, and those items which a Christian midwife in H has sent were also brought along, for which may our dear Lord be humbly praised." Now, when Muhlenberg traveled home to Einbeck after the call, he wished his family farewell. He went to London, he stayed with the chaplain, and reached Ebenezer in June of 1742, in October of 1742. Muhlenberg presented the chalice in Grinnell's home and described it as a bequest from a friend in Germany, a godly young man of the town of Norlingen, George Matthias Kinderlin, who on his deathbed in October 1741, that ordered that out of various articles. Muhlenberg wrote to Bolsius that his departure, and he only stayed a few days, left him downcast. When he arrived in Pennsylvania, he found church provisions lacking, and compared to Ebenezer, he wrote, "It is so very difficult for us to obtain a chalice here. There is no one who is able or willing to make one, so as yet we do not have one. I might well wish for a pair of them, even if they were only copper or tin." Historians credit Bolsius and Grinnell and their strict theocracy for Ebenezer's success. And they governed every aspect, as we know, of the society. They served an outreach from all the way to Savannah to Perrysburg, which attracted a lot of needed talents to Ebenezer. In 1731, a 57-year-old Hans Kruse, a cabinet maker from Switzerland, visited Ebenezer in hopes to immigrate to from Perrysburg. The Swiss reformist was not really welcome here. They didn't find him compatible with the community, but they did hire him to make wheels and carts and rice mills for the orphanage. And the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts actually has a table that they attribute to Kruse, and it's one of the earliest known examples of Georgia attributed furniture. And I have pictures of this. Prior to Kruse's arrival, Friedrich Mueller, a Frankfurt clockmaker on the third transport, flourished not only in carpentry and cabinet making, but also silversmithing, tinsmithing, and blacksmithing. He spun buttons and carved handles out of antlers purchased from Native American women. Mueller's skill and industry won Bolsius's respect and secured a commission from Oglethorpe to craft 6 wooden clocks for the Frederica settlement. In October 1739, Bolsius decided that women should receive the catechism on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the men on Wednesdays and Saturdays, in order to alleviate the overcrowding in his home. But he stated, "But I shall teach them the same material so that they can repeat it better at home." And this was also the practice in the German churches in Pennsylvania. Now, Martin Luther prescribed that 2 sacraments, baptism and Holy Communion, should take place before the church community, with rare exceptions. In 1753, the minister baptized the infant girl of Mr. Kraft and Mr. Lineberger's enslaved laborers in this church. Mr. and Mrs. Lineberger promised before God and the congregation to raise little Katharina in the faith as if she were their own child. While the ministers freely baptized those that came forward, they frequently denied entrance to the Lord's table to individuals that lived contrary to the community. Bolsius wrote on November 16, 1742, this is just a month later after receiving the chalice, "We observe from the recent Sunday Gospel on the 22nd Sunday after Trinity God's loving kindness and our duty to him and our neighbors. Among other things was shown that one must not be separate from the others, and that those who neglect their duty are very much fooling themselves if they take comfort in the kindness and mercy of God. A married couple who is in the church, who, however by their own fault, was little improved by the sermon, they are bitter that we cannot allow them to go to Holy Communion, but we cannot help them." And Holy Communion played a profound role in the Salzburger identity indeed. The Protestants and Catholics alike remembered Christ's Last Supper, which was a communal act. Luther adamantly objected to the Catholic Church's practice of only administering the bread to the laity. The Reformed Church administered both the species or elements, bread and wine, to all observant communicants. The Catholic Church addressed this faction for those remaining in Salzburg and suspected of being a Protestant. They were forced to take an oath to affirm that the Popish sacrament of the Lord's Supper under one species, bread, is more efficacious than the Protestant sacrament under both kinds, bread and wine. As a sign of solidarity, the trustees presented Bolsius and Grinnell with a silver chalice, paten, and vestments and altar cloth and other items needed for their worship on Christmas Eve before their departure from Dover on that first transport. Bolsius' account of the gift, however, specifically omits the mention of the paten, emphasizing the importance placed on the chalice. The chalice and paten were in use for 8 years until the Kinderlin chalice arrived. 18 years later, they received another chalice, Again, the significance of the chalice is reaffirmed with the April 23rd, 1760 entry. The German people of our confession have had a local German silversmith make a silver communion chalice that amounts to 7 pounds sterling. Through the praiseworthy society and the worthy benefactors in Germany, God has granted our congregation 3 imposing, well-made chalices, 2 of which are heavily gilt. Now, sadly, the retired pastor for Jerusalem Church testified about a century later that 2 goblets, a pitcher, and plate were among the losses following the Union occupation of the area in December 1864. Now, how this chalice avoided being looted during the Revolutionary War and the war between the states remains a very glorious mystery. Jerusalem Church loaned the Salzburger Chalice to Bethel Lutheran for a brief period in the last decades of the 19th century, and Mrs. Scrivens provided the description of the chalice still at Bethel when E. Alfred Jones and the National Society of Colonial Dames published their landmark book called Old Silver in American Churches. 20 years later, it graced the Savannah bicentennial pageant, reenacting Muhlenberg's presentation to Bolsius. In 1934, the Georgia-Alabama Synod included the communion chalice in their March meeting. In October of that year, 1,200 people descended on Savannah, where the chalice was featured on the communion table and in the Salzburger pageant that followed. The Lutheran Brotherhood Insurance Company also featured the chalice. And the Atlanta Journal and Constitution wrote an article in March of 1957, and in the images you can actually see the chalice up at the top corner. Now, the German inscription on the chalice has not only promoted the Georgia Salzburger story for nearly 3 centuries, it also provides a clue as to the very unique feature that reveals the full purpose of the chalice. The inscription, "Whoever brings himself to the Lord's table with repentance or atonement and belief through the blood of the Lamb will be revived with consolation and healing." It's a promise of healing to the infirmed through Christ and is an appropriate gift given the circumstances surrounding the bequest. The chalice, though, has a profound feature, and it's a little circular box that is soldered up underneath the base. It's only about 1.75 inches in diameter and is used to hold the Eucharist or the wafer. It is, I think so. It is known as the pyx or the wafer box. The shallow container precludes it from serving a group. It was therefore intended to function as a traveling communion set to serve the infirmed. In the previous letter that Robert Peavy uncovered, it continued, "The silver will not all be necessary for a cup, so it remains to be consulted and agreed on whether one would not like to have a little key or dish made for the use in the administration of the Holy Communion. I was thinking that perhaps one is sufficiently provided with the sacred vessels, in which case there could be procured for the silver some other useful thing which could remain as a memento. However, as it was the last wish of a young man, it might better be carried out, for one is generally accustomed to have several cups in the church, and one could be for the service of the sick. The Salzburger Chalice unites the body, the bread, and the blood of the wine of Christ in one vessel. It also united the shut-ins with the congregation at large through the use of a common cup. Now, current research indicates that this is the only known example in colonial America anywhere. There is a Swedish chalice and paten in a congregation in Pennsylvania. And the form looks very similar to the Salzburger Chalice with its very shallow bowl and its highly adorned, they call it a knop. It's that little figure directly below the bowl, and then the scalloped pedestal. But their pyx is actually separate from their chalice. Now, the question that I was asked was, what about the host that they put in that? Well, there was actually an article used as a waffle iron that was used to make communion wafers. And the Salzburger first transport included Frenchman baker Gilbert Beck. And hopefully hopefully the Lamar Institute will turn up a Salzburger wafer iron, and I hope you'll call me even if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, because I'd love to know. On October 27th, 2019, Jerusalem Evangelical Church celebrated 250 years of the completion of the church. Nearly 100 people knelt and received Holy Communion from a silver gilt cup given by a young man in Germany that died nearly 3 centuries earlier. Many communicants drank from the common cup of their ancestors, but all drank from the common cup of their faith. Compelled by the Georgia Salzburger sacrifice, George Matthias Kinderland joined with them in fellowship. Through the enduring symbol of sacrifice, the Salzburgers were united with their homeland through a native-made peace inscribed in their native tongue. In 2010, a paper was presented at a metals conference in Charleston that was entitled "The Effects of Fingerprints on Silver." And it determined that the chlorides combined with the fatty acids in our body begin to corrode the copper alloy with silver in as little as 12 hours. The fingerprints, therefore, are permanently etched into the surface of silver in as little as 12 hours. Therefore, those that took communion from the Salzburger Chalice that day united their fingerprints with those of Mittnock, Erlsberger, Ziegenhagen, Muhlenberg, Bolsius, Grinnell, Trulin, and all the others that joined to practice their faith. They also leave their fingerprints for those that follow. William Frick, author of Henry Melanchthon Muhlenberg, wrote, "What a precious week at Ebenezer. Despite the fever with which Muhlenberg was suffering, he handed over Ziegenhagen's letter, a solid silver chalice for which a pious youth in Germany had left money on his deathbed. He preached at their devotional meetings and partook with them of the Lord's Supper, blessed sacrament that binds together the saints of Grosendorf and Einbeck, in London and Ebenezer, and in Pennsylvania too, and the saints of the first century with those of the 18th, and both of those with the 20th, and now the 21st. Thank you.